Welcome to HortTube. My name is Putnam. In this video, we're going to talk about one of the more confusing things in gardening, and that's definitely watering. I think a lot of the other things are the planting and pruning and fertilizing, and a lot of things are pretty easily taught and repeated regardless of kind of where you live in the country. But watering is always going to be one of those things that has to be learned, and a lot of times it has to be learned about your own space. Like this, the type of soil you have, how easily is water infiltrating into the soil when it does rain, and how long it takes to re-wet the soil, whether you should be overhead irrigating, whether you should be watering the plants individually, whether they're new plants that have been planted or old established plants that have been planted. Like, it's just kind of all over the place. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is has to be learned about your own lot. So what I thought I'd do this morning, it finally rained here, and I know there's part of the country that's flooding right now, and then part of the country that's been extremely dry, and we're in this little dry band here in Raleigh. We were just put into a drought area this past week, but we did get rain yesterday, and I wanted to shoot this after we got a little over an inch of rain, because typically folks are gonna say you need between an inch and a half of rain or inch and a half of water per week. Well, let me show you what happens in different soil types with that inch and a half of water. Yesterday, we got a little spritz of rain in the afternoon, and then we had a more significant rain overnight. But we have this little area next to us, this little lawn area that the city owns. And if I dig down over here, your typical lawn area, so you could have a slope. A slope would obviously have a big impact on how much water is infiltrating the ground, right? If the water's just running off of it. Or you can have these turf areas where you have a lot of traffic on them. They've been compacted a lot over time. You're in new construction, which is just, your soil hasn't been improved yet. You haven't been there long enough to really figure out how to capture the water and keep the water on the property. But a situation like this over here, inch and a half of rain after we haven't had much recently. And look right here, right below that surface area where that thatch is, it's just completely dry. Didn't take me any time at all to find really, really dry soil down below. This is really gravelly over here too. But it's just not infiltrating the soil in this spot. Now let's go over to the garden and see what happens after about 4 years of soil improvement. So I could do this anywhere in this garden. This is a 0.19 acre lot here in Raleigh, and it was under just grassy weeds basically that had been mowed for decade after decade after decade, similar to how that is over there. Probably had a little less foot traffic on it. Ultimately over here wasn't quite as compacted overall, so it was probably a little more receptive than like a new construction space would be, where they've stripped off the topsoil and that kind of thing. From there, we covered it in a little bit of compost, wood chipped the entire thing, and now it's had multiple reapplications of hardwood mulch on top of it that have broken down, and we leave our leaves. So that's another important component. So we're gaining this organic material. So now I can take a water hose and I can aim it at the bottom of a plant or anywhere in one of these beds, and that water hose can just run and run and run, and you'll just see the water just disappearing into the ground and not running off. It would take a lot of water on this lot to actually lose it over here to that side lot where we just saw how dry it was. But here, I'm standing in the vegetable garden, but I can do this anywhere in the lot. If I just pull some of this organic material to the side, look, first of all, I can stick this shovel, which I've worn down quite a bit. This shovel was about this long when it was new, but it's currently about 7 inches long, and I can take it and just stick it all the way down in the ground just like that and pull this up, and you can see that inch and a half of rain, all that water just went directly down to the ground. So now I have a reserve of water at least for a few days. Whereas over there on that side lot, you can see how much, how little it infiltrated, and it actually just ran off and went away. So there'd be a different type of watering I would do, based on those two types of scenarios. I actually call this time of year sudden death season, and we'll lose things in our gardens this time of year, and you gotta don't think you're a bad gardener, okay? I mean, I had a nursery for 23 years, and this was the time of year when the temperatures exceeded their norms, when, the nighttime temperatures don't fall. We had it was 81 degrees when I came out of the house at 5:30 in the morning one day, a few days ago. It was 81 degrees. that time of morning. It's just, it's a crazy temperature. And at the nursery, you know, we'd have this beautiful crop of gardenias, and then the next thing you know, 10% of them had root rot related issues, where the roots it was just incredible stress conditions. And you can see that in our garden. So we could have borers, you know, taking advantage of, you know, sick plants. We can have, you know, voles are after, you know, there are a lot of things after moisture. So we can have squirrels girdling the plants for moisture, you know, eating them down at the bottom. Rabbits will do that. Voles can be more active this time of year, looking for moisture in things. We could have, you know, root rot related issues, especially, so this Caryopteris is a great example here in the garden. About half of this plant is dead. I don't know if the rest is going to die or not. It appears that it is. And I actually don't know right this minute. This evergreen dogwood was in full bloom for about 3 weeks. And, you know, we're super nervous about this thing a lot of times. It's one of the main staples of this garden. And maybe we were over here overwatering just a bit, trying to keep, you know, make sure that the dogwood, which was absolutely covered in blooms at a time of year that was really tough conditions and drought conditions, did we overwater the Caryopteris potentially during that period of time? That's actually my guess, because again, it was a well-established plant. Though there's not a lot of slope to this garden, but it does slope this direction. There's a very mature Japanese maple around the corner that's dead. There's a big Rosa Sharon on a neighbor's corner of her house up here up the road that's half dead. Very established old plants, because the subsoil is so dry right now, and the wind has just been, you know, pulling the water out of the top of the plants. And so we're seeing even mature things struggling in these conditions. So again, I call this sudden death season. So don't blame yourself if you're losing a couple things this time of year. You'll hopefully maybe learn from it. You know, again, I don't think we learn from planting things and everything going correctly. We don't really analyze those kind of situations. We analyze things when we start losing things. And so we have a couple, you know, this is a great example of a fantastic plant that's been thriving out here in the garden, and all of a sudden it declined really quickly. And again, I do think the entire plant is dead. I'm hopeful that one branch over there is going to be fine, but, you know, we shall see. But again, I just want to make sure that as I continue talking about watering in this video, that you're not too hard on yourself, because you will, when the extremes happen. Some plants can decline so quickly that you don't really have a chance to save them before they're gone. There's a lot of different techniques we can use to water. I could overhead irrigate with this sprinkler. I could have an in-ground sprinkler system. I could have a drip system around my plants, you know, around, it's just in between the mulch and the soil. I can hand water everything out here. But with their soil differences, you know, the big part of this channel is about improving soil. And so you can do what we did here over some period of time, but initially, you know, that just may not be your reality, or you may be on some sort of slope. If that's the case, you need to be watering slower, okay? If I had that turf area out there and I was trying to wet it, if I threw 1.5 inches of water at it all at once, a lot of that water is just going to be lost and it's not going to soak in. What that area out there needs is several waterings, you know, several slow waterings to infiltrate that soil completely, as opposed to what's happening over here where I'm standing, which is where I can just turn on the water and I can just water, right? And it's going to infiltrate into the ground. I don't have to worry about losing that water. I don't have to worry, you know, about the effectiveness of how that water is going to go. So whatever type of system I'm using, I can just throw the water at it until, you know, I've saturated the area thoroughly. One of the advantages we have here that a lot of people consider a disadvantage is clay soils. So if I'd gone a little bit lower over there in either of these spots, we would hit a clay layer. And sometimes that clay layer can be much closer to the surface. I've lowered that a bit by adding all this organic material, but a lot of people in our area and in the Southeast, and whereas humans don't really like it, it is good at storing water. It's very difficult to re-wet once it's dry, but it is good at storing water. Our new garden down in Wallace, North Carolina, that project we're going to start next year, is very sandy, and water is going to fall through that column much faster. It's probably going to require a little bit more thinking through. But again, you know, your soil type, your compaction, where you are in your gardening, you know, is going to determine when and where and how much water you're applying, and it's really about checking. So I'll come over here in this bed and dig down a couple inches with my finger, or take that shovel and go down and see, you know, actually, is it wet? Is it moist? You know, what are the conditions? Because sometimes in the afternoon here, we're having days, our average high temperature here in Raleigh in the month of June, I'm shooting this on the first day of July, but right now, if you look up what is my average historic temperature, it's 89 or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, somewhere right in there. We're having days 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. We have a 100 degree day on the forecast for this week. What happens on some of those afternoons is some of these things wilt. And it's easy to go out and panic water. Okay, it's really, really easy. It's very difficult when the temperature extremes happen. But I'll go out here and I'll dig down, and I'll take the shovel, and if I discover that there's moisture a couple, 2-3 inches down, I just have to pass on the watering, because it's easy to overwater in these conditions. The assumption is if the plant is wilting, it must be dry, right? But that's not necessarily the case. A lot of times when we get temperature extremes that are 10 degrees above our average temperatures, the water is coming out of the leaves of these plants faster in evaporation right out of the leaves than the root system can possibly bring up to the top. Even more so with newly planted things. We've got a couple of burnt things here in the garden where they've gotten a little burn on the top of them, and it was the result of the top of that plant being out of balance with the root system. So I've newly planted it, I damaged the roots on it some. No matter how much water I threw at those roots, they're not going to be able to bring enough water up to the top. So there is a solution for that, though, when you're planting new things and dealing with this kind of imbalance between the root system and the top of the plant. If you have something that's newly planted and it's clearly struggling to figure out how to balance the water, you can go and prune them just a bit. Sometimes it's better to sacrifice a few flowers in the first year, or prune something at slightly the wrong time, just to get that thing back in balance. You know, you can come through a lot of times just and take off flowers. You know, something like this salvia, if it's new this year and it's a perennial, you know it's going to come back the next year, it may be worth sacrificing a few flowers. We're getting to the point in the summer where you do have to think about, you know, whether it's too late to prune azaleas and prune some things that flower early in the season. But if they're struggling, it might be better to, you know, take off some foliage and think about the long term, rather than the short term on them. Some plants are going to stay out of balance almost no matter what. and some of those things will have large leaves, like this hydrangea right here. This hydrangea, it's difficult for us in the Southeast to figure out where to grow big leaf hydrangeas, because we have to put them in a little bit of shade, but if we put them in too much shade, they stretch. If we put them in too much sun, they bloom better typically, but then midsummer, they just melt in the afternoon. So they're kind of difficult. And I don't panic water. I don't water to the thing, you know, they always talk about a canary in the coal mine. Don't water to the canary in the coal mine. We don't water to the thing that wilts every afternoon. I know this thing's gonna wilt every afternoon. If I decide to water the entire garden based on this one plant, I'm definitely gonna overwater the rest of the garden, okay? I'm better off waiting till the evening and seeing if it perks back up, because again, it's a balance issue. This leaf is so big that it exposes itself to having more water come out of that leaf faster than this root system can bring it up. And again, it's just difficult for us in the Southeast. And so be careful not to water to the driest thing, or what appears to be the driest thing in your garden, and do check. A few other things to think about when you're having extreme temperatures and low rainfall. Number one, this organic material that we put down would have helped with clay or sand. I would definitely want to point that out. It's helping infiltrate water into my clay-based soil, okay, because I got earthworms and I've got all this life working to help me. You saw how much water that had absorbed over there. In a sandy soil where you're frequently going to lose water through the column really, really quickly, all that organic material will slow it down. So it's helping me infiltrate in one and helping me, you know, so it's not overwatered. And then on the other extreme, it's allowing some water to stay in that soil profile. I don't fertilize when it's 10 degrees over your average temperature. So I'm definitely not going to fertilize when it's 100 degrees outside. I don't think that's a good idea to be thinking about trying to push your plants. Your things in containers would be maybe a slight exception to that, because it's a little easier to keep the soil moist in a container. It's easier to check, it's easier to figure out. So maybe, on a container on the side of the house over here, if those things, I felt like those things needed fertilizer, I might fertilize those, but I'm not gonna fertilize anything in the ground and try to push them, trying to swim uphill, have the plant try to swim uphill, right? While we're in these extreme temps. So I'll let those temps break a bit before I add any fertilizer to them. The combo we've had here in Raleigh has been particularly bad. We've had above normal temperatures, and then when we've had the threat of rain, it's just kind of burned out right before it got here, and then the wind has come with it. So we get the extra special, and that's what's happening even right now. The wind is helping just dry it right back out, any little bit that we would have gotten. Once it gets extremely dry, it's kind of hard to get rain. You need evaporation floating up into clouds and to get rain, and we don't have a lot of water to work with in the soil. So drought kind of feeds drought, wet kind of feeds wet. I mean, you'll see that that's just kind of normal. So we have a drip system. We laid out drip irrigation when we put this in, and I've really just never used it. And I feel like going back and doing that, it was a lot to do with putting down a drip irrigation system so I could talk about it on a YouTube video, but really, I don't want to water something that's really super established out here. We've got some plants out here that just would not need, even though I'm calling this a very dry event that we've had for the last few weeks, a lot of the really established things out here in this garden would never have needed water through that time. So I don't want to water the entire garden, until I would need to water the entire garden. And the wind is really picking up. So that little bit of rain we got yesterday, it's evaporating right now and giving the coast. It's going up in the air, and the coast will get that water later today. So we're going out here and just watering things based on need. So I'll water the container, you got to check the containers virtually every day, and we'll water those. We want the water to run out of the bottom of the pot slightly when we're watering the containers, and then let them dry out between waterings. That's kind of key. Same thing with the things in the ground. We want them to I want to give them a little tough love, but we got to be super careful in what we would call a drought situation, because that tough love can go downhill really, really fast. And so I always talk about tough love, not necessarily when it's this dry like it is right this minute. And my tough love thing kind of goes out the window. If you planted anything this spring and you're in an area where it's just really, you're in drought conditions, you really need to be checking on that plant and watering it thoroughly, and watering the area around the plant pretty thoroughly, either with a water hose, sprinkler, in-ground irrigation, drip irrigation. I don't care what it is. It doesn't really matter. And you can figure out from your drip irrigation or drip pipe, you can put a bowl underneath it and figure out how long it's taking you to get about an inch of water in it. And then you may want to water differently based on the water infiltration. So if you're trying to put down an inch of water and you're seeing it run off at all, I would back off and only put down a ½ inch of water, and then let some hours pass in between, and then put the other ½ inch of water. So we don't want any kind of runoff off of the property or off of the beds. So again, I don't think it really matters. So that's newly planted things. Things that have been in the ground 3, 4, 5 years, and you're in an area that gets pretty normal. You can get rainfall any time of the year. Most of those things probably haven't reached the point of really needing additional water. If you do water your established plants, keep in mind they have a very established root system on them. It's probably deeper into the soil, and you need to almost put the water hose at the base of one of those plants and turn it on a little bit and walk away from it and let it thoroughly saturate that area around them, because they're going superficially watering a plant that's been in the ground, that's 10 feet tall and been in the ground for 5 years. If you just go over and just spritz the bottom of it, it's not really watering it well. And then let those things dry out again. You don't have to readdress those things that have been in the ground for a long time. You have to readdress the things that have been in the ground for a short period of time. And then 3 o'clock in the afternoon happens, and you're looking around the garden and you're going, oh my gosh, so many things are in rough shape. Let the sun go down in the evening and figure out which of those things immediately pops back up. Those things that immediately pop back up are almost certainly just losing more water in the afternoon than they can keep up with. You can either try the pruning technique of reducing the size a bit, or just allowing it to happen. You know, just because you can't do anything about it anyway. And watering that plant's not going to change the fact that it just can't bring water up as fast as it needs to. We do reach the situation though, and Steph and I have reached that situation in the last couple of weeks where we've kind of watered everything. I mean, about a couple times in the last month and a half, and we wanted to have the garden looking great because we had an open garden event here, and we wanted it looking good. So we kind of watered everything. It's just not an approach I've ever used before, but when we're in a just extreme drought situation, it just seemed like if I watered a little bit here and I water a little bit there and I water a little bit there, there's so much dry soil in between them that they're wicking. It's basically the dry soil's wicking water away from my plants. Out west, you can put your irrigation on a timer, because you've got dry air and you're not going to get rain for some period of time. And here in the east, where we have potential for rainfall and we have humidity as part of it, these plants are capable of getting water out of the air as well. So when we have these kind of humid situations like I have this morning, these plants are fine, even if the soil is still not necessarily perfect. So again, there's an area difference too in terms of watering. Main thing is check. I can't express that enough. You need to check, you need to dig down. You get 1.5 inches of water and you think that it's infiltrated and you're good to go. That might be a good time to water if it's like what I showed you over there in the side lot. Because now that water's infiltrated just a little bit, now it's receptive to me being able to water it. If I got an additional rain today, I could get that soil wet over there. Over here, where all this organic material has built up over time and we've really, really improved the soil and it's receptive, that single 1.25 inch rain has now infiltrated this soil and I can go a few days without watering, without even thinking about it. So there's some thoughts on watering. Again, I think watering is something you have to learn about your own soil. If you have sandy soils, that water is going to fall through that column faster. You're probably going to have to do potentially some more watering on it. If you have these clay-based soils, you need to get, either way, you need to have organic material being added to them, having them mulched. If you're in new construction, it's going to take time for that soil to kind of rebound from the amount of compaction and that it did on it. Turf areas are not great at holding heavy rain events. They're just not. They're just going to get a certain amount on there and then the water's going to sheet off of them, like we saw over there on that side lot. That's under grass, and it's just, we probably half of that water or more when it fell quickly in a thunderstorm definitely ran off of that side lot, whereas this lot took all that water in and now it's in storage. You can rebalance plants with pruning. That's one thing that we can do if we've got a plant that we're checking the soil and the soil seems moist, but the plant's always wilting. We can rebalance it that way. Don't water to the driest plant in your garden. You're definitely going to overwater. This is the easiest time to overwater. If you plant something right now and then you see some yellow leaves happening on the bottom of it or in the interior of it, and it starts shedding those leaves, that's telling you it was dry. Once it rebalances itself some, that's the best time to overwater something. And this is the thing, you'll go, oh no, I forgot to water it. It's losing some leaves, and then you panic water it. But the plant already kind of put itself back in balance a bit, right? It lost half its leaves or a third of its leaves to balance the different, the amount of water it had available versus what it had foliage-wise on top. So it already put itself back in balance, and then you start panic watering it. And when you panic water it, that's when you're going to overwater it. I think more things will get overwatered in this situation probably than underwatered. So check them. Don't panic at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Panic at 6 o'clock. Best time of day to water, everybody's going to say the morning, so you're not keeping foliage wet at night. Guess what? I live in the southeast United States. We have dew on everything in the morning, and it's wet all night long. And I would rather water. I don't want my plants to go to sleep bone dry, so I would rather water personally in the early evening. If you're, especially if you're hand watering and you're not getting the foliage wet on them. But even overhead irrigating them, I don't mind. I realize this is a cut and paste world, and everywhere on the internet you're going to see people have said don't water in the evening. But guess when plants grow? Plants grow at night. That's when they actually grow. So going to sleep extremely dry so I don't keep the foliage wet overnight to water in the morning is not those two things don't really compete all that well. I want the moisture in the ground in the evening, especially if I'm trying to get flowers out of it, like annuals or perennials. If they're going to sleep at night in a drought stress situation, then they're not going to put on that growth and put on those flowers that we're looking for. So I don't want them to go to sleep. But again, I do think waiting until the evening, waiting till get some shadows across the garden to decide whether or not that thing needs water, because a lot of things will just immediately come right back out. They were just protecting themselves in the afternoon from that direct sun. So there's some thoughts on watering. It's really something you have to learn on your own about your own space. It's really, really hard to teach. Everything else about gardening is pretty easy. Watering, I think, is the most confusing. There's some thoughts I have on watering during the extreme summer months. Thanks for watching.